I'm Tapscott.
And I'm Alex Tapscott.
And this is What's on Tap this week. Actually, for everyone, what we're going to do is take questions now on Twitter and other platforms. So keep an eye out for us there. Anything that we raise today, or for that matter, other issues, we will do our best to answer them. What's on Tap is now in its second season. It's growing quite nicely, actually. So, Alex, I guess we appear to have something useful to say. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, in that spirit, this week, what do we got? Well, yesterday, El Salvador became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. And it wasn't that easy. The rollout was kind of plagued by glitches as the government had to take its Bitcoin wallet offline for a while because there were just like thousands of people, tens of thousands of people tried to download it all at once. And President Nayib Bukele went on Twitter to also announce that the company was buying up Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And when prices corrected, he claimed he was buying the dip. It's sort of sounding more like a crypto hedge fund manager than the head of state of a sovereign nation. Anyway, so it's too early to say whether the launch was a failure or a success, but the market reacted negatively when prices declined as much as 20% before rebounding. So, Alex, what do we make of this? Is the El Salvador government going to succeed? Why would they do something like this? What does it mean for crypto adoption? And is there any sort of read through to CBDCs, to central bank digital currencies, or for that matter, other blockchain applications? If you could answer all that in the next 30 seconds, that would be really excellent. Alex.
Well, first, I wouldn't read too much into the price movement. Could have been a little bit of buy the rumor, sell the news. This El Salvador thing has been around for a long time. Yesterday was the day that it became official, but I believe it was announced much as early as May or June. I'm trying to remember, early in the summertime, and the news itself came at a time when Bitcoin prices, were at their nadir for the year and have rebounded quite a lot. So, I don't think that the price of Bitcoin, it depends on what the government of El Salvador does. But I do think that this was an important milestone for the asset class and for this country as well. You in your opening remarks, you said that the prices that the app was forced to be taken down for a period of time because there were so many people signing up. Well, that's a pretty positive thing. But at the same time, I think a lot of people were having a hard time using their government-issued IDs and other sort of, accreditation to actually access it. So there's sort of an interesting dilemma there, right? Places like El Salvador struggle with financial inclusion, largely because people don't have access to identities. And in this case, even the people who did have some form of identity still couldn't access it. So the big question is this, are these implementation challenges or reasons that this kind of a scheme this kind of decision is a bad idea? And I think it's just too early to tell at this point in time. And I think that the Mr. Bukele, President Bukele, is obviously very interesting, innovative person who has taken this very bold step. I think it's a little odd that the president of a country is talking about buying the dip, but such as it is, that's the world that we live in today. So I think that we just have to wait and see on this. I think that it's going to take some time to roll out. Look, like in the United States, the Affordable Care Act, was rolled out with a website that cost billions of dollars and didn't work for a lot of people for a period of time. So technology sometimes doesn't work. Governments aren't always the best implementers. And so I just think we need to give it some time. In terms of your other questions, I think that it's a big milestone for Bitcoin, more symbolic than it is like material. I think that El Salvador bought 150 million Bitcoin yesterday, and I think they want to get to 450 million Bitcoin. I mean, there are, hedge funds and individuals that own more Bitcoin than that. So that's not going to move the needle in and of itself. But I think if it's successful, could be an example that others in Latin America will want to consider following. El Salvador is in a really unique position because they're not a currency issuer. They use the US dollar as legal tender. Versus, say, I don't know, Brazil, which has the real, or Mexico, which has the peso, or obviously the US, Canada, and others. And for countries that are in that position, weirdly, using Bitcoin, which is not issued by El Salvador, obviously, is decentralized cryptocurrency, is probably gives them more sovereignty than being beholden entirely to the US dollar. Whereas I'm not totally sure that if you're Brazil, it makes sense to adopt Bitcoin. I think probably what makes sense is for you to use the crypto technology rails to create a stable coin in your native currency, which will expedite the payment system and make the economy run a bit more efficiently. And then the question is that something that will be handled by banks or private enterprise or startups, or is it something that will be handled by the government? And, there are, I actually did some little research this week looking at CBDCs. There are dozens of CBDC projects underway around the world, but none other than in China are, implemented, and none are implemented at scale yet. So it's a topic that we like to talk about. It's on the cover of The Economist as, this big thing. But so far, there's been limited implementation. When you compare that to private sector stablecoins, the story is very different, right? Like, at least in terms of US dollar stablecoins, the amount in circulation, I think, is around $150 billion. Having grown from a few billion just a couple of years ago. So that's a very interesting thing. And then, in terms of blockchain and applications and crypto generally, Bitcoin today is 45% of the market capitalization, so less than half. And I think that's reflective of the fact that more and more value is being created in other systems. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin isn't important or that it isn't going to continue to succeed. I believe both of those things are true. But it does show that on platforms like Ethereum and others, there is increasing innovation, and that's accruing value to those platforms. So that's something that I think is probably not dependent on Bitcoin or whether a country like El Salvador embraces it.
So is there a taxonomy here where countries that have a currency pegged to the US dollar might actually be the natural adopters of Bitcoin as a sort of official currency for the state, or how do you think this might evolve, and what might make sense for countries to do?
It's a very good question. Looking at the number of countries that do use the US dollar, it's pretty limited. These are countries. I'm just decided to pull it up. Obviously, the US. Puerto Rico, El Salvador, Panama, Turks and Caicos, Somalia, Guam, Zimbabwe, they have their own currency, but it's useless. Palau, Timor-Leste. I mean, my point is it's a pretty small list, pretty small countries. Right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So, I think that it would be, what's way more interesting to me, not way more, but what would also be very interesting is if and when central banks of large established currency issuers like, say, Canada, or Japan or Australia, or obviously the United States, if they were to buy Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? So there's a scenario where, countries like El Salvador and others are buying Bitcoin, more and more banks are holding it, more and more private individuals are using it, and that creates a necessity for them to hold Bitcoin as part of their overall sort of currency basket. And it's possible that they do. We don't know that yet, but probably not yet at this point. And so to me, that would be really revealing. That's for sure. So I don't think we're there yet.
All right. Well, that's the big news this week.
Yeah. Well, there's something interesting that you're going to be doing next week, which is getting on an airplane.
Yeah. I know, they're really weird. Apparently you sit in a seat and you put on a seatbelt and it doesn't go on the road. It goes up in the air.
I know.
Yeah. And then when you
and where are you flying to?
Well, of all places, Houston. So it's It's the big oil and gas, blockchain oil and gas conference. So it's all the big oil companies, basically. And it turns out all of them are doing all kinds of stuff related to blockchain. The group was called the Blockchain Oil and Gas Consortium, and they're now blockchain for energy as they make this obvious transition. So, just physically doing this is going to be mighty interesting. Apparently, there are different armbands, red, orange, and green, where you can indicate your level of comfort in getting near somebody. And so I guess in Texas that would fly. They certainly can't mandate that everybody's vaccinated. So it's going to be interesting.
And what are you going to be discussing at the conference?
Well, it's kind of a weird thing when you think about it, that here you have an industry where what they do is no longer, there will not be a market for it in a few decades. I've been trying to think of an example. Maybe you or somebody else can come up with one, but it's like a trivial example is you make sports equipment and you know that everyone is not going to play sports in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're in the electricity power grid business, and all of a sudden there's a new form of power that just comes from a little thing, and no one will use the grid anymore. So this whole decarbonization, it involves the historic evolution away from all their core products. And there are all these other problems in the industry. They got environmental disasters. It's a big one last week that's still going on in the Gulf, where a big oil spill has occurred. And these are old pipelines that are under the Gulf, and nobody can figure out where the stuff is coming from, and nobody knows who's responsible. You got all kinds of big costs of problems of how do you get stuff to market because of the concern over pipelines. You got supply chain instability. There's fraud and corruption in the industry. There are cyber hacks, a huge, massive installed base of stuff in this industry, and they're just growing sort of maintenance costs and complexity. And the pipeline thing is a good example. So I'm really kind of getting into two things. One is, how can blockchain help them in their existing business and start to move towards a lower carbon model? And the bigger one is, how can blockchain help them really reinvent their entire industry?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting subject. I'm not sure how you're going to get it all in 1 45-minute presentation.
Well, they gave me an hour, thankfully.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, piece of cake. Well, one of the things that, I think is really interesting are carbon trading schemes. So, as you know, I know a little bit about this. 9 Points Bitcoin ETF is carbon neutral. We've decided to calculate the carbon footprint of our ETF and enter the voluntary market to buy offsets to basically neutralize the footprint of the Bitcoin that the ETF holds. And that's a decision that we thought was important because, we want to make sure that Bitcoin can be included by investors who care about the climate. And the same is true for investors in oil and gas companies. There's a lot of concern around the decarbonization. If I was an oil and gas CEO, decarbonization of investment funds, companies that can't or won't hold shares of oil and gas producers because they're of their carbon footprint. Now, the carbon trading opportunity is an interesting one, but right now it's a market that is evolving. We feel comfortable being in it, but there's this voluntary market. It's not big yet. It's not particularly liquid. Price discovery is not as good as I think it could be, though it is improving quite a lot. And one of the things that could be a solution here is a blockchain-based carbon trading scheme, right? Where credits themselves, natural asset tokens representing carbon offsets, can be transacted peer-to-peer and to a decentralized registry, in effect, right? So similar to a blockchain. And give people comfort that when they're buying something, that it's attached to the project that they think it is, that it's a credit that hasn't yet already expired, that they're not buying the same credit someone else is buying, the double spend problem, all these kinds of issues that we think the blockchains and decentralized networks can solve. So is that something you plan on talking about at the event?
Yeah, there are really these two categories. There's the current industry. So they need to rebuild their supply chains using this technology. And of course, we've written about this. Blockchain is the new supply chain. All across the business, both upstream, midstream, and downstream. Upstream being all of the exploration, and downstream being the taking stuff to market, in the middle, all the refinery and so on. That all needs to be re-engineered. They've got all these traditional sort of ERP systems that are getting a little long at the tooth. There's the whole issue of coordinating contracts between partners throughout the entire industry. And that's a big opportunity. When you think about just construction management, they build a lot of stuff and they will keep building stuff for the next period. And we've done a lot of work for anyone who's interested at blockchainresearchinstitute.org. You can go there and learn about the applications in construction management. But construction is a perfect sort of application for blockchain because it's all about agreements and executing agreements and making payments when agreements are fulfilled, and it's about knowing the provenance of all of the materials moving around and what happens to them and so on. A real big one in the industry has to do with land rights and royalty rights. And this is, of course, a huge problem all around the world, that most land titles are not enforceable in most places in the world. So if you want to start a new project of some kind, that's a big issue, and blockchain can help. Post-trade settlement is a big one, and oil and gas post-trade settlement, and this can all be digitized using blockchain. There's a whole issue of regulatory compliance, and again, it's well known that blockchain can help with that. The issue of maintenance and inspections, again, this is a lot of complex moving parts. You need to know where things are. You need a single version of the truth. Blockchain can help with that. There are big opportunities around embracing crypto that are not transformational, using Bitcoin within the industry, or maybe they should create a currency for the industry. And so there's all that kind of stuff. And then there's the big about how do you get to something new, and how could blockchain help basically rebuild the entire industry around a sustainable model. And the starting point for there is just being able to track carbon. I think what you were alluding to, and they could be as an industry, they could get together, and I'm going to propose this, that they could be tokenizing carbon credits. Now, there are some little initiatives underway to make that happen, but the whole industry could do it, and they could create a market for carbon where they could start trading this stuff with themselves, and also more broadly in the marketplace. And that would help. That would be an action. I don't want to give away my whole speech here. An action towards creating sort of moving to a more sustainable model. And at the heart of all of this is the idea of transparency, which the industry is not really favorable to overall, I would say. And Alex, you'll remember this, but many people won't. When I wrote The Naked Corporation with David Tickall, it's like 20 years ago now. 20 years ago, I said that transparency is a new force, and companies are going to be naked. And if you're going to be naked, there are some corollaries that go along with that. One is that fitness is no longer optional. Or if you're going to be naked, you better be buff, as we said. And the difficulty there is that there's a lot of what goes on in the industry that's not very fit or buff. And so, but on the other hand, transparency can be a force to help bring about change in the industry. So I'll be getting into that too.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that an idea whose time had, I guess, not yet come when the naked corp came along. But today is probably the most important issue that corporate managers deal with, which is how are they fulfilling their obligations to investors, to think about issues like ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance. And it's a pretty broad swath of issues. It's not just the environment, it's also what's your role in the community? How do you compensate your employees and your workers? What are your values and so forth? Companies are not, they're not charities, they're not governments. They do fundamentally have, first and foremost, a profit motive to consider, but they're now expected to do more and to think about more issues. And I think overall that's a very good thing. And I think that blockchain as a force for creating transparency and accountability, I think will become increasingly important to every industry. And certainly the oil and gas industry could use a little sunlight, as they say, is the best disinfectant. Or you said that, I think. So, well, I think that sums it up for what's on tap. That's a great preview of what you're going to be doing next week. Is there going to be a recording available for people?
Yeah, apparently there is. And I'm the opening speaker, but there are God, it has to be 80 speakers, most of them from the industry. So it sort of belies this weird concept that there's nothing happening really with, forget about crypto, with blockchain in large enterprises. Just to look at the agenda is extraordinary, to see the breadth of all the speakers and the topics that they're going to be covered. So I'm certainly looking forward to it. And the BRI is going to take all this material. We're actually going to write it up as some kind of report or series of transcripts or interviews, so on. And I'll be heading down there with Douglas Heinzman, who's our chief catalyst at the Blockchain Research Institute. So lots of fun. One other announcement. Blockchain Revolution Global, our big event for the enterprise, was scheduled for November of this year to be in Toronto, with some hubs in other locations around the world. We've decided that we want to have a really big face-to-face event. And given the situation with the Delta variant, that it's wise to postpone that. So we've postponed the event until April 21st, 22nd of 2020, and it's going to be awesome. There'll be people coming from all over the world. We're going to have a big black tie gala that evening. Now, the Enterprise Blockchain Awards will still happen. All the submissions are in, and we have this awesome judging panel led by Irving Wadesky-Berger, the legendary former IBM exec who got Lou Gerstner to adopt the internet. And Irving's got a great team. And I learned yesterday, by the way, that they're using Judgify, and all of the judges actually don't know the names of the companies that they're examining. And they don't know what the other judges are saying about these, just to ensure real independence and integrity in the judging process. So the winners that they come up with are going to be real carefully scrutinized and objectively considered winners. So that will be November 16th. And we're going to use holograms again, and partnering with Art Medium, we'll be beaming people onto the stage. And if you go to the Blockchain Revolution Global, you can get a picture of what we did for that, or a video clip of what we did for that last year. So that's it for what's on tap this week. Alex, anything else?
No. See you next week.
Okay. Take care, everybody.